As you were looking at me about the time, the respect of the time, I feel I will maybe talk a bit fast, as I have many things to comment on this first hearing. Starting with a short introduction on how patients see the affair with Valproate, then some expectations from the public prior to the meeting, then how the meeting itself was conducted, and early insight on the impact of the meeting. So the chronology of the Valproate crisis started, in fact, not immediately when the product was authorized, even if at the meeting some patients say that there were some warnings, early warnings that had been ignored when the product was first introduced on the market. But I presume in the late 60s, right after the thalidomide crisis, any product used in pregnancy would generate fears among pregnant women. And these warnings were maybe very frequent. It's only in the 80s that there were early warnings, first reports on the potential for teratogenicity, and in 84 that the first case of malformation in human was reported. And then the Prague discussions and recommendations in 2014. And many patient organizations, and then we had the public hearing, and many ask, so what happened between 84 and 2014? A bit like if there was a black hole where reports were coming in, but not many actions were taken to explore and to decide what could be done. And then with the new legislation, we had a kind of Hubble telescope exploring, monitoring all what's in the space, all what's in the market, with a control room, the Prague, analyzing in real time the signals and the information and reacting more promptly. So the pre-hearing expectations, and I would like to quote this sentence from the legislation, really the public hearing where due regard shall be given to the therapeutic effect of the medicinal product. It's the safety issue in the therapeutic context, which is the basis of the public hearings, which I think it's extremely important. And this was exactly what was discussed, the role of different products to treat these different conditions and the respective efficacy and safety of Valproate in particular. So patients expect to be more involved, to add transparency to what is often described as the comitology in decision making. And for this, they need to better understand how products are regulated and to participate in all these processes, the public hearings and the consultation with stakeholders, and now early scientific advice. I think it helps the public to fully participate in the decision making and in the opinions that are prepared by this agency. And participating in decision making by providing different insight is really what we want to achieve for all opinions made by regulators. So the first is impacted by the composition of the public hearings, how it is conducted, how people are informed, and how the procedures are explained, and the preparation and the dialogue at the hearing. These are questions that were often asked before the hearing. Will the process be open and transparent? Will the debates add something to Prague discussions? Will it contribute to the decision-making, or will it be more a post hoc explanation of an already made decision? Will it be a dialogue or series of stakeholder statements with no dialogue? Will it be confrontational, political? Will some try to use this platform to pass a more political message than really working towards a solution? And will it have an impact? Will it become the EU-wide reference forum, the authority, the forum where really the knowledge is, that can be used as a reference for all those who still have questions in these circumstances? There are different types of participants, of patient representatives that reflect different attitudes, different cultures, different stories, different backgrounds, different state of mind, etc. And this is, of course, a bit simplistic, but there are three categories of patients. Those with cold anger, they tend to think ahead. They analyze the problems, they suggest ideas, they play their role in disseminating information, and they generally think, how can we improve the measures taken back in 2014? These are people living with the condition and acting on the problem. The second group are those with the warm anger. They are more in a complaining mood. They systematically look for responsible person who was in charge, who didn't do the right thing, or bringing case to the court, or advocating for financial compensation, which is needed in many cases. So they typically look at what happened between 67 and 2014, and that can be summarized as victims counting victims. And the third category, which is into parentheses, because I don't think they were represented at that meeting, the so-called mock scientists. I don't know if the term is adequate, but it's more patients who tend to become experts. They tend to adopt more the point of view of scientists, not exactly addressing the experience of those living with the disease. They are talking about the patients, not necessarily saying we, but I don't think they were present at this meeting. So a few words on the organization and conduct. In particular, I think it helped greatly the discussions that the PRAC members and the chair were systematically asking, what would you recommend? What do you think we could do more than hasn't been done until now? It really drives interventions towards the desired objective. A second aspect is the mutual respect. I think it was clear immediately when the meeting started that there was mutual respect, everybody willing to play the rules and to express their views, and freedom of expression that goes together with mutual respect, where all opinions were listened to. Different opinions could be confronted, and that's really the basis of a democratic debate. There was room for emotions and stress, and that's extremely important. Not all speakers addressed all the questions equally. Some expressed more their feelings, not just fact or evidence. And I think that was absolutely necessary to show that the discussions was connected to reality. That was real. People were there with their emotions. For those who were listening to a discussion at the EMA for the first time, it was absolutely needed because, as you know, some tend to think that, well, it's another committee in Brussels, well, in London, technocrats talking about disease. No, it demonstrated that it was really down-to-earth dialogue. Fairness, I think it was excellent to open the floor to the audience, to the observers at the beginning of the meeting, and the reality check showing that nothing is black or white, that regulating is not telling the absolute truth, but deciding on what to do with the best possible evidence. A few things that could be improved. We discussed already the attendance, the diversity of participants, and perhaps we could think of other participants who cannot travel, but maybe if they could meet at their national agencies and listening to the webcast from there, and they could engage immediately discussions with their national authorities from what was said at the public hearing. What can we do locally in their own language? And Natalie, you said that we need to think how to find people in other countries than the UK, but now there is this other question. We don't want to lose the input from experts and patients from the UK. How are we going to do this in the near future? I think we need to find solutions. And then other things like the webcast. I don't know, I didn't look at the one on fluoroquinolones, but the first time we didn't have a large room view, so it was difficult looking from the internet. It didn't give really an impression of a public hearing. It was more focusing on the face of the speakers than having an overview. The language barrier, so one speaker had interpretation, and I'm not sure if that possibility was publicly announced, but I know some contacted us because we told them, no, you cannot go if you don't speak English, and then they saw this interpretation, so they questioned. Public hearing or debate, in fact, the PRAC members engaged immediately in discussions, in commenting the statements, and that was excellent. So here it's not room for improvement. That was a concern, but in fact, it wasn't one. Completeness, not all questions were answered, and maybe at the end of the meeting, it would have been useful to recap the few questions where we didn't have the answers provided at the meeting. So maybe to have outstanding issues at the end of the hearing and for some follow-up. And also maybe for a true multi-stakeholders debate, maybe to ask different stakeholders when preparing their interventions if they had questions to other stakeholders that they would like to discuss in the meeting. The questions came from the PRAC, but maybe we need some discussion prior to the meeting. If, for example, patients or clinicians have questions to industry, maybe find a way to address them here. So I will just mention two things on the impact. A short review we made on how many articles on the internet we could find using Valproate, EMA, and public hearing in different languages. And there was quite a large coverage, which differed from countries to countries, some with maybe too few articles. So we grouped English over the UK, but it contains also many articles published in English in other member states. But I think it gives an overview on where the attention was the most on this public hearing, but globally quite a large coverage. Another thing about the impact, and that was shown by the head of the French Agency to Patient Organizations in May this year, you see, in fact, a marked decline in the users of Valproate in France starting in 2014 by half, which halved the number of users. And I'm sure they will continue to monitor this, and probably after the public hearing, we will continue to see this trend, a decrease in the number of people who use Valproate, both for bipolar disorders and epilepsy. So maybe to conclude, I think we didn't have a lot of background information on the therapeutic context for those who were completely new to this topic. Without more information on the disease and the treatments, it was difficult to understand the discussions. I think we need, it also means that we need more synergies between HTA regulators and learned societies, because this information, this discussion on Valproate can guide the discussions, the consensus discussions on how to treat people with epilepsy, but it's a class issue, it's not a product issue, and we need more discussions between those who make these guidelines and regulators. And maybe one last point. So here there are two different types of side effects, the congenital malformations and autism. And you can have some financial compensation for both, but one is extremely difficult to obtain financial compensation with autism. How do you demonstrate that this was due to the exposure of Valproate? And this is a social impact of adverse drug reactions. How is there a role for regulators to flag these in the package leaflet or educational materials, maybe adding a new type of information? If you suffer from a side effect, you may be eligible for financial compensation, and you should keep your prescriptions, etc. Else, years after being exposed to the product, you never have the documents to claim for your rights. And I think that's worth some thinking. That's part of the context information that I mentioned. Valproate is only one product of its class, and it's one of the champions in terms of efficacy, but with a lot of problems with the risk of malformations. But I think that would have been useful to be shown at the meeting. Some outstanding issue which I pass. So overall, I think regarding information, this is where maybe room for improvement could help. Really a bit more explanation on the case before to start the discussions. In terms of political platform, I think it was excellent. It was exactly what the legislators had anticipated and asked. The impact, because maybe too early to measure the impact, but maybe we we will see an improvement there. And regarding transparency, I think it was excellent. Organization and conduct also very well. Maybe just a few details that need to be improved. So to conclude, as said Mark Twain, you need time before you can act on something. You can now detect problems more rapidly, but action will need more time. Here we need to change the prescription habits, and even if we are 3 years after 2014, we have to expect a longer process for this to change. National hearings in member states where the topic is hot, which I already mentioned. I think it illustrates the efficacy of the regulation with this, that sounds a bit like an ad message. With black triangles, we won't see black holes anymore. That's a wish, but maybe we are already in that direction. And I think the meeting was excellently organized and chaired. I had my colleagues sitting with me who had never seen a meeting at the EMA, and they said, wow, it really helped to have such an excellent chair. And I think we can all credit June Rainey for having chaired this meeting this way, and the EMA for having organized the first public hearing. Thank you.